Hello and welcome to TIP International Radio. I'm your host, Leah Maston. We're showcasing prestigious top professionals from all industries all over the globe who share their experience and stories of success. I'm so excited for today's guest. Joining us from New York, he is an honored member of the International Association of Top Professionals, IAOTP, and he was selected as their Top Environmental Scientist of the Year for 2019 and is being considered for the Lifetime Achievement Award. You can find him on the front cover of TIP magazine this month. He is a Professor Emeritus of Biology of UC Santa Barbara, a previous faculty member of Yale University's School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, former adjunct professor at the University of Miami, and former chairman for the University of California's Environmental Studies program. Please welcome Dr. Daniel Botkin. Hi, Dr. Botkin. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, Leah, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
It's really such an honor, and I'm really looking forward to chatting with you. Dr. Botkin, you have devoted a significant part of your life and career to environmental science and researching and educating possible effects of climate change on biodiversity. Tell me, what got you interested in this field?
Well, ever since I was a small child, I wanted to know how nature worked. Actually, I just had this fascination with how everything worked, machines, everything, photography. And so when I was in high school, buddies of mine in high school, we lived in a small town. We'd go camping out in the forest nearby. We didn't have any tents or anything. We just took some potatoes and some matches, and we got up. We had something to sleep on, and we dug a hole and cooked the potatoes, had those, so make sure that they were in a hole so they couldn't start a fire. And then in the middle of the night, we woke up, and all around us were these little bits of bark from trees that were glowing. There was some kind of fungus that showed their light at night. And so that started. And then I've just always been fascinated. When I was 5 years old, I had to understand how the solar system worked. So I cut out circles, one for our sun, and one for each of the planets, and I put them around the living room. And then on paper, I drew rocket ships, and they had space for carbon dioxide and for oxygen and for waste and for food. And I cut them out and I, quote, flew them, unquote, as a little kid around the room. So I was always fascinated with how everything around us worked. And so I just got more and more interested in how nature worked. And then when I was in college and right after college, I was fortunate enough to work in forests. I had a wonderful father-in-law who had owned forests, and he was a country surveyor, so he would have me help him survey, and we'd walk around the woods and have a great time.
Well, that curiosity has certainly served you well. Dan, as an international voice in the scientific community, you led the National Science Foundation's long-term ecological research program and initiated NASA's use of satellite remote sensing to study ecology from space, and are credited for writing and creating the first successful multi-species computer model in ecology. Tell us about those.
Well, the NASA and the National Science Foundation asked me to lead those projects, which meant there were committees of people, and we really got things going. We started the long-term ecological research program that still exists, and we had a lot of fun doing the initial NASA research. I flew a lot in helicopters with test pilots because we were using the same sensor that was in the satellites that were looking at the Earth, only we were calibrating them. So had just a great time doing that. Now, by that time, I was a well-established ecologist, environmental scientist, and they recognized that, and they knew I'd majored in physics as an undergraduate, so they knew I understood understood math, and with this curiosity about how everything worked, they knew that I understood technology. And so also, both of them believed I was good at getting people to work together, other scientists. And so that's how I happened to do those, and I really enjoyed doing them.
That must have been such an exciting time. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, of course I got to travel to all these wonderful wilderness places all over the country and talk with people. And we were asked to find out why these places were so wonderful, and they were run by universities. Why wasn't anybody doing research in them? And so we got the answer. We got the answers. Yeah. And that led to the beginning of this program called Long-Term Ecological Research. And this NASA stuff was just a lot of fun. I became friends with the test pilots.
Oh my gosh, I bet they have some great memories.
Oh sure. Well, I got my own pilot's license.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, an instrument rating. I love flying, and so for me it was just a big joy being up there with them.
That's so fun, interesting. With having over 5 decades of professional experience in biology and environmental science, what is some advice you would give to your students or to other scientists starting out in the field?
Well, I would say, first of all, get outside and get familiar with nature. And don't just walk by it, but get involved with it. So there's lots of things you can do. I mean, you can just become a hiker, but you can become a fly fisherman or a bird watcher, and all kinds of things, whatever you're interested in. And you just got to get out. And for example, if you can go, for example, to a forest or to a body of water, which lets you put your hand either in the soil or in the water, do that. Get involved directly. You can dig a hole and look at the soil, and then pick out the animal or plant that you're most interested in, and then find out about it. And then, in addition, you should be reading books about nature. There's wonderful books about nature. And then there's wonderful societies like the Audubon Society that provide all kinds of guided tours and help, and you should join some of those. And even if you're a city person, now there are birds, big birds, who nest on the top of big skyscrapers. And in some cities, these are now have web cameras. And you can go on the web and watch them, and they'll lay their eggs and have their little babies. And you can join groups that are watching them. So even if you're in a city, there's wonderful things to do. And if you're out in the country, of course, you just got to get involved. But you got to be involved. You can't just be walking along, talking on your cell phone because you won't be in touch with nature. You got to really sit down and get dirty.
And then it sounds like you have to have the whole curiosity piece too. You have to ask questions and.
Oh yes, of course. You've got to ask questions. You've got to find. I mean, why is that bird diving here? And why is it nesting on top of that little tree? And sure. So I studied big game wildlife and had all those questions. It's always been a lot of fun. Has to be fun.
Was becoming a professor and scientist always what you had envisioned for yourself, or did you originally have a different career path?
Well, I have to give you 2 answers. First answer is what I told you, that I always had to know how everything worked, including nature. Right. But then, when I was a teenager, I read books by Joseph Conrad and Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Conrad was born in Poland, and he left and joined the British Navy and became a British sea captain. And he loved traveling and adventure, and he liked having risky adventures. And he had the most incredible stories. And then when he got in his 40s, he stopped doing that. He lived in London, and he wrote novels, short stories, and nonfiction. And Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, he wrote this lovely children's book called about the prince, the great story about the prince. And then the children loved that story. And then also he wrote a beautiful books for adults. She wrote a book called Wind, Sand, and Stars. And he was also adventurous. He was one of the first commercial airplane pilots in the 1920s. He flew the mail from France to Africa and back. And he also liked adventures. So his plane stopped running over the Sahara Desert. He landed, and he had to figure out how to get out of the middle of the Sahara. And that's what the book, The Little Prince, is about. And so I read those books and I said, I want to be like them. I want to have an adventurous life. I want to have risks and have fun with those. And I want to travel. And I wanted to add one thing, though, because they lived before the invention of environmental science, ecological science. I wanted to do it as an ecologist. And Zucre flew airplanes. Conrad was a ship captain. So I wanted to do that too. So I did research on elephants in Africa, and the guy that was the world expert, Ian Douglas Hamilton, on African elephants, he and I became great friends, and he flew me around in his airplane and was trying to scare me, and I thought, geez, I really like this. So I went back and got a pilot's license and an instrument rating and flew all over myself. So.
Well, you certainly have lived a fascinating and adventurous life.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been fun, and I meet the most curious people, interesting people, because I've done projects for big governments. And then you go into wilderness and you meet the most curious people, because people who can't really make it in regular civilization, they escape to wilderness, and some of the oddest people you meet in the world are there, and you'd never meet them any other way, and they're so curious. And you learn a lot from them. It makes you think, how come they're like that?
Yeah. It certainly sounds like there's never a dull day. Dr. Botkin, you do it all. You are very active in your community with so many affiliations. You are a sought-after speaker, presenter, journalist, published author, and I hear you now have a video newsletter you are working on. Can you tell us about that and what you are currently working on?
Okay, well, maybe you want to know a little about how I ever got into writing as well as science. Well, my father was a professional writer, very successful, so I grew up around book publishing, and I always wanted to write. Then I had these three goals, like Conrad and Exupéry. I wanted to write after a while. I majored in physics in college. My sister went to the same University of Rochester, and she was a real star and majored in biology, and she sent me all the books from her courses. So by the time I became a freshman, I knew all the biology. So her professors, they were so impressed with her, they wanted me to major in biology, but I said, that's too easy, I already know that. So I took the hardest subject I could, physics. I majored in physics. I really liked it, but I didn't like being indoors. So one day I went to my major professors and I said, I really love physics, but I don't like being indoors. I want to do a science outside. And they said, there aren't any sciences outside anymore. And I believed them. So I thought, what the heck? I'll go do the other thing that's outdoors. I'll become a journalist. So I got a wonderful fellowship from the University of Wisconsin, working for their news bureau. So I got to interview top scientists and doctors from some of the best in the world and write about them. And then I got a master's degree in English literature, always helping me learn about how you write novels. And then I worked as a journalist in New York City professionally for several years. I had a really good time working for something called the Worldwide Medical News Service. And that was fun. But then I decided I wanted to get back into the adventure. So I got into the Peace Corps. That was when the Peace Corps was good. And so I spent 2 years in the rural Philippines and got to know people that were really interesting and very different. And then I got married to a woman whose family had a lot of land in New Hampshire, and her father was a country surveyor. and he would survey in the forest, and I became his helper, the guy that holds the pole, And we walked through beautiful forests, and I kept thinking, there's got to be a science about this outdoors.
Right.
And my sister then sent me this little book, just published, called Ecology, the first textbook by Gene Odin. And I saw that book, and I said, that's my career.
That's it.
So I got accepted in a PhD program at Rutgers, and had a great time.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah, so it was a funny adventure.
It all leads to where you were supposed
career,
to be. But throughout your illustrious career, you have won numerous awards and have been recognized on an international level. This past year, on the front cover of Tip magazine, on a billboard in Times Square, and in the Wall Street Journal. And I hear you will be honored at IAOTP's annual awards gala at the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas. What would you say has been the highlight of your career or the most memorable experience that you have had to date?
Wow, I've had so many wonderful experiences, things that have happened to me. I can't imagine how I could tie it down to one, but just the kind of things that I've been telling you about, each one was remarkable. So when I lived in the Philippines and got to know a village chieftain whose name was the Sultan of the World and adopted me into his family, that was wonderful. Then the government of Taiwan asked me to come and advise their equivalent of their Secretary of State and Secretary of Agriculture about how they should get involved in environment. And my guide there was a guy who had taught English in the United States and taught English. He was Chinese, taught English to the Chinese there. So we had a lot of fun talking about Chinese civilization and our civilization. That was wonderful. Then I worked with a wonderful major professor on my PhD, Murray Buell, a great man, a real New Englander, and he was so helpful and so much fun. I mean, he was wonderful. Then I've worked with some wonderful people that have been some of the highlights of my career, and they've guided me. One friend, colleague at Yale when I was on the faculty, got me to work at Isle Royale National Park, which is an island in Lake Superior, one of the coldest parks in the United States. And it's complete wilderness, and it had wolves and moose, and we would go there and study it, camp out, and sometimes at night when we'd hear the wolves, we would go running through the forest to see if we could find them. And then studying, I got involved with endangered species. People asked me, because I knew some math and knew how to write programs about forecasting the future of endangered species. I got involved very early in my career when I was at Yale, working on endangered species. I worked on sandhill and whooping cranes, and then I worked on salmon. The state of Oregon passed a special bill for me to lead a study about whether the salmon were in trouble and what might be causing it. And then I got this opportunity to work on elephants in Africa, and because they were the best studied. And I got to work with a man I just mentioned, Ian Douglas Hamilton, who was just a great adventurer, just the kind of person I liked. And so we liked to go in close to elephants. And he would fly me around, hoping he could scare me by flying 6 inches off the ground. But the more we did it, the more I loved it. So that was wonderful. Then a wonderful guy, John Boxtos, who's a world expert on Eskimos and the far north. He's an anthropologist, but he has a steel-hulled 60-foot sloop so he can sail against the ice. And he got to know the Eskimos so well that they made him a member of their whaling crew. And John came to me and said he was studying the log books from the whaling ships, the Yankee whalers out of New England, and that he had found 20% of them, and every day at noon the first mate wrote down where they were, what the weather was, what the temperature was like, what the sea ice was like, what the ocean temperatures were, and so forth, and how many whales they caught. And so we took that data, 65,000 days of records, and he came to me because I knew how to do the analysis and the mathematics, and we've had a great time for many decades working together. I mean, how can you beat that? And so I just, there's just a lot of wonderful things that happen that I love doing, and it's because of such good friends. And of course, you know, my family and my children mean a tremendous amount to me, and so that's a high point too.
Absolutely. Well, you've definitely had a very blessed life and full of adventure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure you have so many more memories that you could go on sharing about that are equally as amazing and beautiful to you. But
yes, people say, my wife and children say, Dan, stop talking.
Looking back, what would you say you attribute your success to?
Well, I think it was my curiosity, what I told you about. And also wonderful people who guided me, who helped me go where I wanted to go. My father had a friend named Paul Sears who wrote one of the first books in the 20th century about environment. And when I wanted to go into ecology as a profession, I hadn't majored in biology, so I got in touch with him. And he helped me figure out what I should do and get into graduate school. And then my major professor, I mentioned, Murray Buell, he was a great man. And the people I've worked with, some of the most wonderful people. So I'm so happy that these people have been part of my life. And so it's my curiosity and willing to get in and get dirty and get wet and go and have these adventures. And also to have enough knowledge of mathematics so I could write computer programs that could be helpful for endangered species. And then we developed this computer model of forests. My major professor used to take me for walks into the forests near where I was studying at Rutgers University in New Jersey. And we'd come across a tree that was very rare in that area. And he was always saying, now, Dan, why do you think that tree grows there? And so we'd get into this long, friendly discussion and think we knew. But I kept saying to myself, well, I don't know. Maybe we don't know. How can we prove this? So using my mathematics, I developed a computer model of how we thought forests grew and tested it. And it's been very well validated. It works really well, and it's used all around the world. So the people, my colleagues, have been great help. And family and children have been great help.
What's next for you within the next 5 years?
Well, you know, I decided to spread out. So I've always wanted to write and always planned to write a novel. So I did write a novel. I don't know if I can show it, but it's this novel called Savo. Oddball Researchers Use Data and Guns to Save African Elephants. And it's based on what I learned in Africa about elephants, which are my favorite animals, so wonderful. And it was my expression of one of the things I always wanted to do since I was a teenager. And so then I write a lot since I worked as a journalist as well. And I've published op-ed pieces in major newspapers, and I've written, in addition to scientific papers, I've written a lot of articles for people, regular people, just about nature. And I had a printed newsletter, and I did things for fun, like I wrote a story about an episode of the newsletter about the ecology of Halloween and one about the ecology of Christmas, looking at it as an ecologist. What can we tell people? And they were a lot of fun. So then I started working with a music video producer, actually two of them. One of them urged me to get involved in doing stuff. And so I did other things totally different with music, folk music on the web. That's another part of my history. which goes way beyond what you and I have been talking about. But my father was a folklorist, and I grew up around folk music. And so famous folk musicians like Pete Seeger were my family friends and my friends throughout my life. And so I made my first folk music record when I was 6.5. And so I decided to get back into that, and professional music video producer urged me to not just do it for family memories, but to get involved. So we put folk music up on the web with my wife, who's a brilliant pianist, and me singing, and other colleagues, other folk musicians and people we knew. And so then the music video producer and I decided to take the ecology of Christmas and turn it into a discussion with me talking on the internet. And we got 19,000 views of it, and people really liked it. So we decided to start a video newsletter. So we're starting that. That's where it comes out in print that we send to people who prefer that. But then I also speak to them just like you and I are speaking. And then we can show movies and videos and pictures. So it's an adventure. I think that's the way communication is going. Yeah, so it's fun. So I do these things because they're so meaningful, and it's not that I plan to do these. I'll just wake up in the middle of the night and think, wow, I should do that.
Why not?
Why not? Right?
Yeah, at this point, I'm like, what don't you do? You're a pilot, musician,
well, I tell you,
elephants.
I'm not good at drawing. I can't draw worth a
Okay,
darn.
well, there's one thing. At least there's one thing. You're a human. Oh my God.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today. It's really such an honor to have you as a guest.
Well, thank you. It's been a delight talking with you, and it's always fun. So thank you so much for having me, and also for the International Association of Top Professionals for arranging this. I'm very happy about that. Thank you so much.
Our pleasure. Absolutely our pleasure.
For more information on Dr. Botkin, you can visit his website at www.danielbbotkin.com.